And it's my pleasure to now introduce the mayors. So I think maybe we should have the mayors all up on the stage for introductions. So Mayor Bruce Harrell from Seattle. Our host, Mayor Lynne Robinson from Bellevue. Thanks for being here. And Mayor Mary Ann Baldwin from Raleigh, North Carolina. So thanks for joining us. It will be no surprise to you in the audience that I am here with an esteemed panel of folks with long careers and also impressive commitments to public service. So let me tell you a little bit more about their background. I'll start with our host mayor, my mayor, Mayor Harrell, who was born in Seattle, grew up in the Red Line Central District of Seattle, graduated from Garfield High School as valedictorian, attended a little school up the road, University of Washington, you might have heard of it, on a football scholarship, got a law degree, went on to serve to practice technology and public service law, and then was elected to the city council in 2007 and then re-elected twice. When he was on city council, he led a number of different efforts. One of them was the precursor for the Seattle Promise, which provides college education to every graduate of Seattle public high schools. And another one that you were a leader in was the fight for a $15 minimum wage, I remember. Mayor Harrell was elected as mayor in 2021. So thanks for being here and hosting this conference.
Thank you.
Mayor Robinson, just across the lake in Bellevue, also has a long history of civic involvement. She joined the Bellevue City Council in 2014, and her colleagues voted her deputy mayor then in 2018, and in 2020, and in 2022, and again this year. She is known as a champion of startups and small businesses at City Hall, but also as a real advocate for affordable housing and community livability in Bellevue. Does a lot of work with parks and open space and human services. She is a retired physical therapist who had her own business for 20-some years. It has a doctorate from Regis University and bachelor's degrees from Northwestern and California State University, Chico. I just wanted to say Chico. And the farthest from me on the panel, Mayor Mary Ann Baldwin from Raleigh, North Carolina, also a long-serving member of the Raleigh community and a leader there. Thank you for flying across the country to be in here with and join us. First elected to the Raleigh City Council in 2007, served 5 terms. Elected mayor in 2019 and re-elected 2 years ago. Known as an advocate for housing and affordability and choice, led an effort to reform zoning there in Raleigh to allow for missing middle housing. Also led an expansion of transit, including the first bus rapid transit line in the state of North Carolina and a major expansion of parks and greenways. Mayor Baldwin has an undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Rhode Island. 30 years of experience in communications and marketing and branding outside of public service, and aside from her duties as mayor, also serves as the executive director of the Cooper Charitable Foundation, which provides housing stability grants to those in need. So obviously we're dealing with a heavy-hitting group here, and we're really excited to hear about all of your thoughts on parks. I want to just kick things off by starting to hear about, as you lead these impressive cities and all their amazing parks, what are your top priorities regarding parks in each of your cities? Mayor, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. And again, as the host, Mayor, thank you for this conference. And you all are sort of crazy in that this is the last day of the conference and you're still here. I'm impressed.
Indoors.
And the work in T.T. Minor, fun fact, T.T. Minor, Thomas Taylor Minor was actually a mayor here back in 1887, the 15th mayor. So my goal is to do this great work here, and maybe in about 100 years, I can get a darn park named after me. And before I answer the question directly, I do want to say, leadership matters, and under our superintendent, A.P. Diaz, he is just a superstar. Many of you know his work. He had come here from Los Angeles, and you can't pay him enough money to do what he does in the way he does it. And that's an exact quote from him, by the way. And of course, his boss is Deputy Mayor Adiam Emery, who was here. Between those two leaders, I get to take the credit for our park system. So our priorities with over 500 parks and 129 restrooms. Number one is I came in office saying, And as described, I've been elected 4 times here, and I know this city. I said, first, let's go right back to the basics. Let's keep it clean. Let's keep it recreational. Let's keep it vibrant. Let's open our bathrooms. And I lived near a park, and it was driving me a little crazy where I go in, and I said, is it that hard to keep toilet tissue in the bathroom?
Yeah.
Or soap, or just, go back to the basics first to get a command of that, number one. Number two, they have to be safe and vibrant. So we increased our park rangers from 2 to 28. And this is a non-badge response. Remember, all of us went through a social justice awakening in this country, as we should. And, I'm not trying to arrest people, but I am sort of bullish in our park system, that I think this is a great equalizer, a great racial equity tool. If the concept of play is critical. So our priority is to make sure they're clean, vibrant. And I'll say this in closing on this subject, is in that, of course, it takes funding, and I know here in Seattle, and again, thank you for being here and celebrating our park success here, but Mayor said we have to get tough on this stuff, because people will try to take the park from you, and maybe even well-intentioned sometimes, but the park is for everybody, and it has to be safe. So our priority, again, is to protect our parks and plant trees. We planted over nearly 10,000 trees last year. And if you cut one tree down here under my executive order, you have to plant 3. So we're pretty, again, bullish on our tree canopy policies here, and those remain our priorities.
That's great. Thank you.
Jess.
Oh, yeah. Hey,
Trees.
my plants.
Trees.
No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
I told someone to always no, I'm just kidding. We're going to have fun.
It's Jess. It's great to see you here. I last saw you in Hawaii for an urban design program where you recommended to Bellevue that we commemorate our Japanese American history. And just last week, we opened a bridge over 8th Street that has a full artist installation that talks about the history of our Japanese American population. So it's great to be here. Bellevue is known as a city in a park. And I had to write these numbers down because I don't see them every day. We have 2,800 acres of parkland and green space in Bellevue, including 90 miles of trails. So in a city that is absorbing the amount of growth that Bellevue has been in the last 10 years, it's really important that we keep that focus. I hear myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
That we keep that focus and try to maintain that ratio to the population. We're also the 24th most diverse city in the United States of our size, and we have over 100 languages spoken here. So maintaining that inclusivity, that welcoming in everything that we do in our parks design, but also in the programming that we do there. And then lastly, just seizing every opportunity that we have to make another park or to add to our green space. And I mean the word seizing, because as Mayor Harrell said, it can be a battle sometimes.
Thank you. Mayor Baldwin.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for having me. I'm going to go back to growing up, because I think this kind of really impressed upon me the importance of parks. I lived 10 minutes from a park. I could ride my bike there. I played softball there. I ice skated there. I picked blueberries there. I went with my brothers and sisters and friends exploring. My favorite thing to do was feeding Fanny the elephant, because it had a little zoo. And that was like my happy place. And I grew up in lower middle class family. We just happened to live close to a park. But it made me realize that parks are that happy space. It's a place where everybody can gather. We can be socially inclusive. And we need to focus on that mental health aspect of it. So I have 2 priorities for this upcoming year. First, we passed the largest parks bond, $275 million, in the history of North Carolina. And people told me, oh, we'll never pass. 73% of the people voted for this. And I believe it passed because it really focused on equity Half of the 275 million is going toward underrepresented areas, places that need that. We have geographic diversity throughout the city, so there's something for everyone. I'll give an example. Chavis Park, which was back in the days of segregation, it just disturbs me to even say this, but it was like the park for blacks. And we have put a lot of investment there. We're getting ready to do our second phase. We're building an aquatic center, and that money will be funded with the parks bond. So, I mean, we're looking at equity. People came out in droves at Chavis Park to vote for this. We're also doing our version of Central Park. We're going to start phase 1 of that. 306 acres we bought from the state for $54 million. We are building the Gibson Play Plaza, and it's the first phase, but it's going to be a play area for kids. It's like you saw in the videos. It's going to have that same feel, and I think it's going to bring this project to life. So I'm really excited about that and the vision. So I'm going to share too my second priority, because I think, Jess, you will appreciate this. I attended the U.S. Conference of Mayors in January and went to a program put on by the Mayor's Institute of City Design, which you used to lead. And I was blown away, because what they showed us was how design can impact mental health. Everything from the colors to the seating to, I never thought of it that way. And when I came back in this year's budget, I lobbied for funding to hire a city architect. Now, we haven't announced this back in Raleigh, so if it ends up on social media, I'm blaming all of you. But this is an opportunity for us to elevate the discussion on design, not only on buildings, but in our public spaces. And I think that's so critical.
That's great, congratulations. And each of you touched on this in your opening remarks, but I wonder if for the next question we could dive a little bit deeper into how do you work to balance the competing needs for these, in big complex cities, parks are such precious resources that there are a lot of competing needs for them. How do you work to balance those? Yeah.
I'll take a first shot at this.
Yeah.
And I want to tell Mayor Baldwin, I'm so impressed. She was at the Mayor's Conference in Kansas City, and she comes here, and you must have a clone or something, because you have a lot of energy. This morning I was at a call with mayors around the world on a Bloomberg leadership call, mayors all the way from Cape Town, South Africa, to all over the country and the world. And what I talked about relative to this question is our park system, as an example. To me, that's the pulse, the sort of the rhythm, the soul of a city. You show a dilapidated, unhealthy park system, and I'll tell you that the city may not be heading in the right direction. So how I sort of calibrate the competing needs are, this is a unifying element. Demographically, whether you're rich or poor, or whatever racial demographic, or however you identify your own personal demographics, this is an equalizer. This is recreational health, if you will. In Seattle, by the year 2028, we'll have built 12 more parks. And in our waterfront, which we are preparing for our FIFA games in 2026, you see 20 acres of new park kinds of facilities and new open space in parkland. That's more than just having cool trees to look at and a view of water. It is, again, that zen, if you will, that special secret sauce in this particular city that I openly talk about, that coming out of COVID, coming out of George Floyd, every opportunity I have to unify this city under our One Seattle umbrella, every opportunity, we're going to seize that. And the beauty of open space and the beauty of a healthy tree is that you and I, looking at our own personal life experiences, we can look at that tree and feel like we have something in common. And plus, we can enjoy the shade as well when we do get these sunny days. So how I calibrate it is remembering our North Star. Our North Star is unity, is driving toward a better community in a country that seems to be as chaotic as heck. that's what the park system represents for me. And I don't mean to be overly dramatic when I say that, but that's why I double down on our park system, because I think it is the unifying element in our city.
That's a beautiful answer. That's hard to follow. Thank you for that. Seriously. I really believe that whatever's good for a child is good for your city. So clean spaces, spaces, a healthy environment, access to parks and green spaces, access to a strong public education. All those things are great for children. What's better for a child than a great park? So that's easy for me to value, but I think that everybody who works on parks to make them happen needs to understand that 95% of the people in our city value parks. When do you ever see 95% of people value anything together like that? Yeah. But they all value parks, and so we really need to support that, and we do that by creating long-term plans. We have these long-term visions that we look at, what do we want the city to look like in 20, 30, 40 years? We create long-term plans. We put parks in our goals, in our plans, and then in our budget. And we were lucky to also pass a great parks levy last year that continued one that we already have, but you can pay for these plans and make them happen. And the last thing that we need to do is to target the areas in our city that have fewer parks than others. So we look at the map, and the goal is that everybody, wherever you live or work in Bellevue, you have walking access to some park or trail space. And so we look at the areas like Factoria, Wilburton, where we're kind of park poor, and we start working on those first.
You're right, we have a balancing act. When we first were contemplating the parks bond, we delayed it for 2 years because we also needed a housing bond. Yes. And so we put the housing bond on, that passed with 70% of the vote. We started working on the parks bond, and there was a lot of talk about those competing interests. I mean, we've got to, police, security, better pay for our city workers, whatnot. But we came to that place with the bond. And how I like to think about parks is they're part of the puzzle. They are part of addressing the needs of the city. So when you build parks, you're addressing climate change. You do it right, you're building equity. Housing will develop around parks because people want to be close by. You want to create that 10-minute walk. And parks aren't part of a balancing act, they're part of solving the puzzle. So when I think about that, I really think that we need to stop pitting things against each other and saying, this is how we build a community for all of us.
That's great. That's great. And, cities are creatures of constant change, right? That's how they exist. And so I wonder, in your cities, in cities across the country, we've seen a number of changes in recent decades, changed relationships with waterfronts and industrial areas, changing demographics in our neighborhoods, changing where people live, like more people living downtown. How do you see parks as part of the response to some of those changes that are happening in your cities?
Yeah, I'll take a shot. I'm going to make this interactive. Just by show of hands, how many of you have purchased within the last month anything online, like from Amazon, just bought anything possible? Yeah, I figured we had a bunch of lazy shoppers here. Of course, we are the birthplace of Amazon, and when we look at what e-commerce are doing to our country and what virtual conference calls are doing to our country, I say this relative to the question because as we change, you can't buy a park online. You can't get that experiential human connectivity online, and I think we're becoming more dependent, almost hungry for the interaction. We'll have over 100,000 people look at our downtown and our downtown activation plan. I'm asking the question, what will the post-COVID, post-e-commerce world look like? What should it look like? Therein lies the beauty of open space and parks. So we have over 100,000 people living downtown, and that experiential piece that we are missing are, again, more parks. That's why we will build more parks. More importantly, you take pickleball, for example, which, by the way, was invented around here, that under the brilliance of the leadership that I mentioned earlier, they looked at dead-end areas that were just not very productive for anything, and we built pickleball courts, and you go by there now and there's people playing. So the question becomes, how creative can we be? If we believe in the premise that open space and park and recreational activity are healthy to activate an area, then how creative can we get? And that's what we're going to do, looking at our building codes in our, Seattle is first and foremost, we're not a high-tech company, a biotech company, a great university system. We are those things, yes, but we're also a port maritime city, industry. And I passed some legislation looking at our maritime industrial lands, asking the question, how do we calibrate that being a port city? Right now, as we speak, from this great conference, I'm going to meet members of a delegation from Daejeon, Korea, South Korea. I had the pleasure of being there a couple of months ago, and and we're one of the biggest trading ports for Japan. So we want to make sure in our zoning policies that we still preserve that trade, that maritime identity, building homes, building jobs, and in that discussion, we lead with equity and we lead with open space and park for that quality of life. So in our plans, it's sort of the wonky work that a lot of you do, we put our values up front and make sure that it's embedded in our plans and how we create this city. We only have 84 square miles here in this city, so well, that could be a lot for some of the smaller towns, of course, but last I checked, you can't invent land, so we have to make sure we use our square footage wisely, and therein lies our commitment to open space.
Yeah, I think with everything that's going on in the world, we need to understand that parks are a big part of our well-being, of our quality of life. And as society adjusts, I think we have to adjust the purpose of the parks. So we've seen Bellevue put in more off-leash dog areas because that's what people really want to do. They want more pickleball courts. We're currently involved in a really interesting effort to create a World League cricket field in Bellevue using a surplus utility property that we own, and because there's such a desire for cricket. So, you need to respond to what the community wants. I think also what's really important is the value of unstructured space. So Bellevue's downtown park is very unstructured. You can play badminton anywhere you want in that park. You can picnic, you can do anything. And my rule is you can just about do anything you want as long as I'm invited. Because we have all these cultural events, and anybody is invited to join in. Whether you were invited or not, whether you expected to come or not, you can join in. Yesterday, or Sunday, it was a youth entrepreneur event, and they were teaching hip hop? They're teaching hip hop. So I'm out there learning hip hop, so I can bust a few moves now. But I mean, it's awesome that I can just go into the park and join in like that. And the other thing is, we have to fight battles. Has anybody raise your hand if you've been to the Maidenbower Bay Park in Bellevue? Not very many. Well, then you all have something really to look forward to, and make sure you go at sunset. It's turning into a bit of a lover's lane because it's so beautiful. But that took 20 plus years of acquisition of private homes along the waterfront to create that park. And when it came down to it was finally to go to the Parks Board, which is where I was at that time, all of a sudden there was this effort to kick everybody who was pro-park off the Parks Board and off the Planning Commission so that the people who lived in that area would have their own private playground. And boy, that was a battle we had to fight, and I fought it hard. And that was my first battle, and that's the whole reason I'm on the Bellevue City Council, because I thought, wow, we got to change some rules about people fighting parks. So, you got to be ready to go to battle.
I just want to add something that Mayor Harrell said. Found this quote from Roy Rogers. And you're probably asking, who is Roy Rogers? Half of you out there. But Roy Rogers, Dale Evans, and Trigger, that was my favorite TV show when I was growing up. But he said, buy land. They ain't making any more of the stuff. And that's what the city of Raleigh has done. I'm going to give you 3 examples of how we're moving forward on some parks that would not have been created otherwise. So one is Smoky Hollow Park. It is right across the street from where I live. It used to be Devereaux Meadows baseball fields. People like Carl Yastrzemski, Jackie Robinson played there. It was a place where I think 7,000 seats, and that was a quarter of the population of Raleigh at the time. So you can see it was important to what the city valued. Well, the baseball went away, and for the past few years, 20 years I think, they have used this for fleet vehicles for the city. So I get to see garbage trucks parked there every day. I'm like, what? Anyhow, 2013 came up with a plan to convert this, I want to say, totally underutilized and polluted piece of property into a park. So some of the things we're going to do there, we're going to daylight the creek, Pigeon Branch, which is the most polluted creek in the city. We're going to put, right now that's home to a temporary skate park. I always joke and say there's no such thing as a temporary skate park or dog park. It's staying. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. But we also have a trail that will connect North Raleigh to downtown and really make this all more accessible, but also greener. It also sits in an area where we have the densest population in the city. All of a sudden, you've given people who live in all the surrounding apartments and homes a park they can walk to. So that's number 1. Number 2 is Dix Park. As I mentioned earlier, that is something we purchased from the state. We are getting ready to use that undervalued land, which is, by the way, stunningly beautiful. I know, like, if you go there, you understand why the state put the Department of Health and Human Services there and the state mental health hospital there. It's because it has this feel about it that brings peace. And so we're building this park, vision for the future, once in a lifetime thing. But we invested. We made that investment of $54 million to ensure we could have a 306-acre park for all. And we also invested, the third site I'm going to mention is the DMV site, old Department of Motor Vehicle site on New Bern Avenue, which also happens to be part of our very first BRT line. We are going to take that site. I went to the Mayor's Institute on Civic Design. They helped with this, but we have started our community engagement process for this. It's right across the street from Tarboro Road Community Center and Park, which we have money in the bond to refocus that and reinvent that. But looking at how can these 2 sites complement each other and how can we make the most value for people who live there. So I guess the words I really want to say is invest in yourself, buy land, because when you own it, you have a say in what goes there.
Thank you. One of the big themes and priorities of the work of the City Parks Alliance is in parks as green infrastructure. Do any of you have any examples of parks that work as green infrastructure or contribute to your city's resilience?
Yeah, first of all, Mayor Baldwin comes in my city with quotes here. I was sandbagging my quote. I'm going to start off this one with a quote from John Muir, known as the father of national parks. Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul alike. And I read that quote from John Muir, just in case some fancy mayor comes to my city throwing around quotes. But to answer the question directly, we realize that our park system are, particularly for many communities, there are heat islands all around. And so we looked at decarbonizing our community centers, making sure, that's why we're so aggressive on tree canopy. And this is where interdepartmental teams become critical, because our parks team can look at it from a parks perspective, but when we talk about our utilities and water recapturing and looking at the use of technology, we have to bring in other teams. And so it really has to be a holistic approach. And again, we have a lot of success stories in how we've repurposed our community centers to become cooling centers, and how, again, looking at recapture water in addition to the tree canopy. So I think our teams in our parks, it becomes critical for them to be team players with other solutions to defeat climate change.
Well, I only know limericks, so I'm not going to say anything. But when I heard this question and when I read it, I kind of rephrased it in my mind, which is, how can we design infrastructure in cities to function as parks? Yeah. And I think with everything we do, everything we plan, everything we design, we should have parks in mind. So I think the Spring District in Bellevue and the Bell Red Corridor are great examples of every developer. We have springs, that used to be a big wetland, and so there are tons of pipes funneling streams all over the place. So every developer has a responsibility to daylight those streams. And we have a plan and a vision to have a chain of streams that you could walk from one to the other. So that's one thing. We're also creating something called the Grand Connection, which is going to be a crossing over I-405. We're just going to start with a ped bike path because it's not simple, but it's the simplest part of it. We can do that first. But we envision having a lid park over the freeway, something like Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, that will be full of parks and green plants. Yeah, that's really exciting. And that's actually going to heal a chasm in our city between the Wilburton neighborhood and the downtown that was created by 405. And then tree codes. Bellevue got bold, and we're passing tree codes. And I have to say, this is a great effort of the community wanting to do this, a lot of activists, but also our master builders and our staff, and everybody got together, sat around the table and said, we've got to do something different. We're getting clear cutting of all our lots, and developers are paying a $1,500 fine and saying, sorry. And so we have to really preserve our tree canopy, grow our tree canopy, focus it on the areas that have no tree canopy, and I hope that you can look at our codes and be proud of us, because we spent almost 2 years on these codes that we're passing. Thank you.
Mayor Harrell, I wish I had a badass quote to come back at you with.
Now we're playing the dozens.
And I don't, so I'm really upset with myself, but
I have 3 more. I was ready for you.
I'll be prepared for you next time. Yeah. So on the topic we're here to discuss, yes, the city of Raleigh, we require our public projects to use green stormwater infrastructure, also called GSI. And I'll give you a couple of examples that we've used in parks. We have a gravel underwater reservoir. We have bioretention areas and green roofs. So that's some examples of how we've incorporated this. One of the things I'm really proud of is in this year's budget, we're actually going to use funds to develop a GSI crew who will go out and maintain these. But best part, Parks isn't paying for it, our stormwater fees are. So
there you go.
It stays dedicated to that. And we also have a street tree equity program. We went and measured heat islands. We used lots of data, but we are out there now putting up new trees because of everything that Mayor mentioned. We have to preserve, but we also have to take care of areas that some of the hottest in our city or in black and brown neighborhoods. And that's where we have to create more investment. One thing I wanted to mention, and because when you start talking about how do you fund all these projects, especially maintenance projects, we initiated a penny for parks 2 years ago. And that is a dedicated property tax. It brings in about 11 million a year, but that's what we use for these types of programs so we can continue maintenance and not just depend on a parks bond to pay for everything. So I just wanted to mention that because it was pretty progressive and very well supported in the community.
That's great. Thank you. And equally important to the role that parks play in resilience, you know, we all know, and I think a lot of the conference sessions the last couple of days here have talked about the role, the importance of parks in being inclusive and making everyone feel like they're involved and they're included. Do you have any examples of ways that parks can address past injustices or can build a more equitable future?
I'm going to give two examples.
Yeah.
And I get excited about this topic. That under the department's leadership, they put a stake in the ground that I proclaimed that every kid in Seattle by the age of 10 will be swimming proficient. We looked at who was drowning and we realized there was a racial demographic component to those that didn't have access to swimming abilities. We stuck it out there. The other piece is, you may recall many years ago that Seattle was known for having one of its major parks taken over. It's known as the CHOP or Chaz situation. I think many of you heard of it. It was a police precinct had vacated, the police had vacated. It was not a good chapter in our city. Out of that protest, there was a Black Lives Matter garden that continued to be there up until several months ago. But the problem with that Black Lives Matter garden is that it was dilapidated. It was rat infested. It was not healthy. By way of personal background, I'm half black and I'm half Japanese. I just look Hawaiian, but my parents met when they were 14 here in Seattle, and when I was growing up as a kid, that there were parts in Seattle that my black father would say, we will be home before it gets dark. Seattle wasn't always the progressive, liberal-minded city that we're sort of known for. We had our racial covenants here as well. And so when I looked at that garden that I made a reference to a couple of seconds ago, I said, look, this is a disgrace if you believe Black Lives Matter, as I do, and many of you do, that we will make sure that we have a treasure to memorialize the Black Lives Garden. So through the thoughtful work of our department, we actually relocated the garden, and it came with a level of protest, and it was on the news and everything else. But I said, look, this is an equal, our parks are our gems. We will have the difficult conversations about race and social justice in our parks, and we will listen to music, and we will have quotes. And I'll always have 5 quotes just in case a mayor comes to my city. I may even have a poem in my book ready for that mayor that comes to our city. And we will laugh together and indeed cry together, but this is where the magic happens in our parks. And so at the Black Lives, and by the way, we met with people in the black community that are more farming proficient and gardening proficient, and we have a huge swath of land dedicated to that we'll make sure they raise money, and it's really a great story. And I think we get this here in Seattle and in many of the cities that you'd come from, that when you find these opportunities to do something very tangible. That school, that T.T. Minor Play Park, I actually attended T.T. Minor as a kid, and it was in what we call the Central District. It was primarily African American. It's been somewhat gentrified now. But we're going still into our areas where we have these difficult conversations, and in our parks levy and our other district funding, we're very intentional about looking who's underrepresented. And that's why the Swim Seattle movement under our department, everyone, and there's YMCAs and YWCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs. We brought in the whole ecosystem and say every kid in Seattle is going to swim. And then we're known for our values of inclusivity. So it's a win-win, and I think therein lies our opportunity.
That's great. Thank you.
You know, as a physical therapist, I look at this diversity question a little bit differently. So when I was working with my patients, I worked with primarily older adults at the end of my career. I tried to take them to the parks in their wheelchairs, and the only way I could get in was by the dumpster, because that's the only place there was a curb cut. And with that, there was like a lip, and there was always that wonder, should I build up momentum and go for it, or should I muscle it over? It's the latter, just in case you wonder. But it was, how come we didn't get the beautiful entrance with the waterfall and the plants and everything? And so when I got on the Parks Board, I talked about the concept of universal design, and can we please, every park from now on, can we make it a universal design? And we have. To the city's credit, we have. And it's really gratifying to see all the different people who now come to the park, and a lot of disabled adults with their adult parents come to our downtown park, and they can because the last phase of the park put this giant ramp in that brought them right up through the entrance, and you can either take the stairs or take the ramp. Either experience is really beautiful. The other thing that we put in at Downtown Park is the Inspiration Playground, and that was a partnership with the Rotary Club. And I remember looking at the plans. We brought in a designer from Denver, and it was to really not just physical disabilities, but neurological disabilities as well. So children who get nervous around other people, who have sensory issues, all sorts of special things that didn't really stand out as being special. Everybody enjoyed them, but it was really designed for that population. Well, when COVID came, soon after it opened, and school was out, and children were not having that opportunity to play on playgrounds, I could not believe how many teenagers would come out starting at 10 o'clock at night and get their vestibular stim out on that playground. And I swear, you could just see the deficit that people had from COVID, and they're filling that up. And even adults would be out there. I remember your niece told me that she went out one day in Bellevue and saw adults lined up to go on this stand-up swing. So, it is truly for everybody.
I love that. Well, first I'm going to say, you can't just talk about this. You have to take action. And one of the things we're doing in our bond is half of it is investing in underrepresented communities. So taking action sends the message that you all are important. And I think that that's something we really need to do. We're also focusing on removing barriers. Sometimes transportation is a barrier to parks use, language, fees, they can't afford the fee. And what we're trying to do is encourage usage for all people and removing those barriers, because that's not the message we want to send when you're trying to be inclusive. We also are really focused on telling the stories of past injustices. I mentioned Chavis Park. There is a place, it's called the Top Green Center, right next to that. And we're also creating a strollway that will connect Chavis Park to Dix Park. All of this is going to tell the history of our communities and what happened and how people were removed, or, some of those things we don't want to talk about, but have to talk about. Because you have to remember, because that's how you prevent making the same mistakes over again. So we are in the process of doing that. We received some federal funding for the Strollway project, which I'm really excited about, and that will help us move forward. In Raleigh, we're also focusing on gender equity. We have a legislature that is biased against our gay and trans community. And my sister is gay. I have great deal of passion over this, because nobody should be treated badly over who they love. Got a little choked up there.
Yeah.
And finally, I just want to say, I'd like to see more development of teen centers in our community. And that population, especially with single parent, like kids who come from single parent families, they need a safe place to go, a safe place where they can find themselves. And we have some successes, but I really want to see us focus more on that. and also focus more on special programs for seniors who live in affordable housing. I mean, our senior population, hey, you want them to be healthy and strong and, you know, have a good life at the end of their life. Our senior population is growing. Let's make it as healthy as we can for them to do so.
I want to talk next about key partners and stakeholders. And with the kind of visionary parks projects that you all have been raising, I imagine that the list goes beyond the usual suspects. You're working with a diverse array of partners and stakeholders to get these parks built and maintained and operating. And so who are those key partners and stakeholders, especially the unusual suspects? And then also, how does that change? What's the role of city government in that complex array of stakeholders?
I'm really good at begging. I'm not afraid to make an ask. And I'd say our first partner is philanthropy, that we recently received a $45 million gift. That's a lot of dough for a park system a little north of the waterfront from Melinda Gates, that'd be Bill Gates' former wife, and from Mackenzie Scott, that'd be Jeff Bezos' ex-wife. You know, we have a lot of billionaires that live here. If there's any single people that would like to find one of these billionaires and then maybe it doesn't work out, we got a park system we need money on, so I'm always looking. But the philanthropic community, I told you we're going to have fun. The philanthropic community has been very generous here, and I think my role as a mayor to make sure that, you know, they'll invest in something that they think is working, that's effective. And again, that's why I talk about the other issues that a park does, the why. The other piece, quite candidly, are sports teams. That when we had the Major League Baseball team here, we were able to get a $2 million donation from the Major League in our zip code at a park that's 98118, which is our most diverse zip code in our state. And now you see kids and families enjoying this huge capital investment. And the last component are just community groups. People, just like your generosity of your time and effort in TT Minor Play Park, community groups are one of our strongest avenues. We have some phenomenal community groups. So our role is to nurture them, give them tools, give them gloves, whatever we can do. But that's an untapped resource. We have here in Seattle, it's called a 1 day of service. And I brought it in as a new concept when I had gotten elected. And I was a little afraid at first. It's 1 day of the year where we print like thousands of t-shirts and we have all of these parks. And you could remove weeds, you could pick up litter, you could abate graffiti. And you know, we printed, I think the first year, like 3,000 shirts, and I was telling my team, man, no one may come out. I'm asking these folks to come out in May. I may be stuck with like 2,500 t-shirts here with nowhere to go, and we clearly exceeded that, and last year we exceeded 4,000, and so you build it and people will come if they think they're investing in something that really makes a difference. And so community groups and volunteers are a critical asset for our success.
He's getting harder and harder to follow. To follow in speaking, I understand what you're saying. But, just wanted to clarify.
See, we told you were going to have some fun.
I mean, everything that Mayor Harrell just said, I think anybody with money and a passion for parks, they're our partner. But we have a lot of community partners in Bellevue. We have the East Trail partners. Our large employers have been amazing partners for us, filling in the gaps. It's not just about building parks, it's about activating parks as well. So our children's museum, Kids Quest, has been an amazing partner activating spaces. And I know, Mayor Baldwin, you have a wonderful children's museum where you are, Marbles Children's Museum. Some of our retired professional athletes have been amazing donors to our parks. Private individuals have donated their land. And I think the role that the city plays is in nurturing those relationships and then just carrying the torch for years. We have Michael Shiosaki here from the city of Bellevue. I'm very glad for the work that he does. He's carrying the torch that was started 2 park directors ago 30 years ago. It took us 40 years to complete our downtown park, if you can believe that. We just finished it last year, and that was at least 3 park directors. But you know, you have to stay with it. We stuck with the original plan. It's a very cohesive outcome. The one thing I will say not to do, don't ever put parking or affordable housing as a place saver in a park. It's really hard to get rid of it if you want to finish that park. So that's just my little advice.
Great.
Well, I'm going to take a little different tactic
Yeah.
here. And I want to give a shout out to Stephen Bentley, who's our Parks Director. One of the things that I have really been focused on is, number one is our internal partnerships. And all too often people work in silos. Stephen has done a great job of working with all of our city departments to help create parks for the future. And I really think that I've seen a huge difference during my 15 years of public service and where we were and where we are now. But that's key, so thank you, Stephen. The second, obviously, is the public. You know, we've talked about that they are our stakeholders, they're the people we answer to. So convening them, having these conversations, especially during changing times, I think is key. The third stakeholder that we really need to be more intentional with is our development community. We see more and more mixed-use development going up. Okay, so my question is, how can we partner with them to create great public spaces and more dog parks, because we do need them, and what other assets we could do. So having that type of public-private partnership, I think, could really help not only the city, but also the people who are going to rent or buy these units. So I think that's key. Another group is our nonprofit community. They do a great job of providing services for our kids, and also our philanthropic community. You know, we have to be thankful and grateful. We don't have what you have, Mayor Harrell, with the billionaires, but we have gotten really good investment, especially in Dix Park, from our philanthropic community. So we have to recognize them and be thankful. And I'm going to bring up one thing where I think we struggle, and I think I've talked to some of you and you have the same struggle. And Chris Haggerty, this isn't meant at you, but we struggle with our schools. We need a stronger partnership. Like, a lot of kids don't choose sports. So how are we providing health and productive experiences for them after school? We have to be more intentional about working together on that. And then we also have all these opportunities in parks for jobs, workforce development, coaching, career planning, part-time jobs, and more. How can we work with the schools to get the word out on that? Because that's an opportunity for kids to explore options, have part-time jobs, and find something they might feel really passionate about. So that's something I do want to see us work on together and move forward.
And as we close this panel, I want to talk about one big idea that I think you all know about, the Open Space for All, Outdoors for All Act. And I know you know about it because just this weekend, the U.S. Conference of Mayors passed a resolution in Kansas City endorsing it. I want to make sure everybody in our audience knows about it. It's a part of a larger recreation package that passed the House in April, and hopefully will go to the Senate soon. It would represent the first permanent funding source for city parks at the federal level. As you think about that possibility, how important is federal funding in funding your city's parks priorities, or anything else you want to say about the importance of that federal partnership?
It's huge for us.
Yeah.
We've been successful, I think, around 5 times in receiving funding. A most recent tangible investment we made is around Garfield High School, which is that's high school here in the Central District. Quincy Jones went there, Macklemore went there, so we produced a few folks in addition to my mom and dad and myself. We're going to do a huge increase in the park walking structure and tree canopy. It's going to be beautiful, and it's federal funding, so we're really reliant upon that. And I'm going to say this in closing, if I may.
Yeah.
That one of the biggest things that I can do as a mayor, or you can do as respected leaders, is again the power of convening folks on this important matter of parks. People will come. Funny story is, when I was on the city council for a number of terms, and I was elected president twice, and I thought I had a little juice, as my kids would call it, and I tell my wife I had some juice. And I called the Seahawks coach, Pete Carroll. He's no longer coach, but I called him, and he was doing something in our park system that he had done down in Los Angeles. I was really interested in. I probably called him 5 or 6 times, emailed him, and never got a call back. I then became mayor, and he not only did he answer my call, but he answered quickly and says, "What can I do for you, mayor?" And I bragged to my wife, "I finally got the juice that I wanted." And I realized that, even though Pete Carroll had turned me down earlier, that I was convening other meetings throughout the city for other things, and the ability to convene is not just confined to a mayor. People will come when they believe in what you're doing, and I think therein lies the beauty of a park. People believe in your work. They believe in why you're here at a conference, and you set the vision for them. You don't have to defer to a mayor or to a governor or even to the president. This federal funding is important, but your power to convene, never underestimate it.
You talked about partnerships in the other question, and of course our federal government is a key partner in doing the work that we do. Also the state and the county level, and I'm going to give you an example of state funding that got at Maidenbower Bay again. If you've ever been there, there's this very funky kind of a ramp with stairs, and nobody knows what it's for. I didn't know what it was for, and I have a very good friend who's a partial quad in a wheelchair. She's an extreme athlete, and which is how she got injured, and she continues to be very athletic, and she came to visit and wanted to go kayaking. So I researched the best way to kayak with my friend and found out that that was a disability access point for kayakers. Oh, and wow. So we went over there, and she started at the top step out of her chair, little rail got lowered, next step got lower, and then was able to swing herself into the kayak all by herself, and the only thing I had to do was put her feet in. That's amazing. And coming back out, she did the same thing. And she was the first person to use that because nobody knew what it was for, but that was state funding. That's not something the city would have even known to put in on their own if they didn't have the encouragement from the state that said, if you do something for disabled people at your park, we'll give you some funding. And so this federal funding, for the city of Bellevue, it fills in gaps. It's easy to repave a road. It's easy to stripe a lane. It's easy to take a green space and mow the lawn and call it a park. What's really hard are the gaps and connecting everything together. So right now, I don't know if you know what East Trail is, but it's taking the old railroad corridor. I think is it 42 miles of ped bike path now from Renton through Kirkland, and it will go all the way to Woodinville, through Bellevue, of course. But we have these key holes in it that we cannot possibly pay on our own. And one of them goes over I-90. It's that old trestle that has the charming graffiti all over it. And so it needs to be replaced. It can't be repurposed. And we just found out yesterday that we got, how much? Pardon? $25 million grant from the, what's it called? Raise grant from the feds to do that project. I mean, that's the difference between that trail being completed in 5 years and that trail being completed in 50 years. So I think this is huge. It will be life-changing.
Well, we got some grants, but they weren't for $25 million. ORLAP, we received a grant. I mentioned Chavis Park earlier. They awarded us a grant for $750,000 to build a splash park there. I love it. It's my happy place. Excuse me.
Do you want my water? Oh, yes.
It's hard when you're mic'd. Don't worry, it's natural.
That's all.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I've learned a lot here today, including, Mayor, that we need some limericks in your binder for next time you go across the lake to fit in Bellevue to make sure you're squared up. But I want to thank you all for the visionary and committed leadership you provide in your cities, and particularly the parks in those cities, and for sharing a little bit of that here today with us in the conference.
Thank you to all of you
thanks.
for making it happen.
Yeah.
Thank you.